wanted to share some tips for those who are interested in painting outdoors or painting plein air subjects. I will share my thoughts on working with reference, preparing sketches, and also working on location versus painting in your studio. I will be working on this vase with some hydrangeas and some geraniums in it. I took this photo in a park here in Houston in Bayou Bend Collection and Gardens. It was a very cold, windy day, so I didn't want to sit outside and paint. And I thought just snapping a photo will be sufficient for me to work from. But when I looked at the photo, not in glaring sunshine on my phone, but in my studio, I realized that my phone flattened everything and all the tonal relationships are messed up. To figure out what I need to do before I ruin a piece of expensive watercolor paper, I'm going to do a tonal sketch. I'm just going to use one color to figure out what needs to be dark, what needs to be mid-tone, and what I need to leave as light in my painting. The best thing to do is to create the tonal sketch on location when you're actually looking at your subject. But like I said, I was freezing. I didn't want to do it on location, so I will just work from experience and try to figure this out in my studio. The main subject of my painting is this big vase with some figures on it. It's pretty elaborate, and the flowers, of course. And everything else needs to be less noticeable and in the background. To achieve that effect, I need to have maximum contrast in my focal area. So the lights need to be the lightest and the darks need to be the darkest. And even though I see those really deep black shadows in the background on the trees and on the bushes, they cannot be as dark as the shadows in the focal point. So I will work really hard to keep those shadows more transparent and slightly lighter. And another thing is that camera captured every single detail, every twig and branch, and if I do that in my painting, I know it will be all fractured and a focal point will not work anymore. So I will try to simplify everything around the vase, and the vase will have the maximum amount of detail. Okay, I think I'm ready to paint. I know what I need to do. I transferred the photo onto my paper, just general outlines. I don't want to mess up the perspective or the details and discover it halfway through the painting process. And now I am ready to start working. You see the list of my colors on the screen. I try to keep them fairly limited. I see a lot of colors in the reference photo as well. But I know that using more than 5-6 colors in a painting is also a recipe for failure. It will be very hard to achieve color harmony. So I have a couple of yellows and a yellow orange. I have a blue and a purple, and I have 2 greens. And of course I have opera rose because I will need something to paint the geraniums and those snapdragons. They're on the bottom, and I'm thinking also I can use that opera rose mixed with cascade green. It creates very beautiful purple. I might use that mixture as well for shadows. Another pigment that will appear closer to the end of the video is magenta permanent. I will use it for darkest darks and deep shadows. My paper is slightly damp, and I'm starting to paint from the back towards the front. So I'm going to work on the background. The day is very sunny, even though it was bitterly cold. And I say bitterly by Texas standards. It was probably 50 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe 7 or 10 degrees Celsius. To create the illusion of sunlight, I want to use lemon yellow. And also when it mixes with my cobalt blue, it will create those distant trees. I think working on a smaller subjects like this for plein air painting is really useful if you're struggling with landscapes like I do, or you're just starting to paint outside, paint landscapes. Working on something monumental like a street or a whole building makes our task that much more complex. So picking a small form like this vase with some flowers, or maybe just one tree or an element, a door or a bench, something like that, allows us to figure out the light and shadow, the tonal relationships, how to work with reference if we could not finish our painting on location. So start a little bit smaller. I think it's much better idea and a great exercise if you're beginner plein air painter, which I kind of consider myself to be. I don't paint outdoors very much, but I love landscape subjects. I am trying to get better at that, especially with capturing those tonal relationships. That's my struggle. I tend to over darken everything and I lose my focal point. So working around my main subject, going in a little bit, I'm working with green. I see some darker areas in the leaves there in the vase. I think it has some ivy there as well, and also hydrangea leaves. So I can start applying those a little bit, but I am working around those flowers because they will be white or very light and also pink. So I need to leave white paper for now for those areas. And you see, I'm creating the background wet on wet. I don't want to paint those trees. They are way too far away. If I give them high level of detail, my painting will just flatten and there will be no depth of space. Working fairly quickly, I want the colors to mix and float, and working with a 1-inch flat brush, touching the brush on paper without any details, because for now I am just creating, like I said, that abstract background. Something neutral for the shadow, and mixing my opera pink with cascade green and throwing in, there was some cobalt blue on my palette as well, creates that nice purple color, which I can also vary and make it more pink or more gray or more green. And here's a very important spot. I am lifting color to soften the shadows. It's very important not to over darken the ground. It seems like we think, the ground is dark, but the sun hits it directly. And if we squint and look at it, or if we look at a black and white version of this photo, we will see that the tone of that ground is almost as light as the vase. It seems like the vase is white and the ground is not, but in tonal values, they're very close to each other. So it's very important not to over darken the ground, because if we do, we will lose that illusion of sunlight, which is this whole painting is about. It's about sunshine and flowers. I think I can apply some shadows on the vase as well. Trying to be precise with my brush strokes, still using that big brush, but I needed to cover a large surface. I kind of switch between the flat brush and the round brush. It's much easier also to draw straight lines with a flat brush. And I think important thing about that shadow is to make it varied. So I see I'm using purple, but then I'm dropping in some blue and some yellow. And if you look closely, that shadow is very far from being one gray color. It has a lot of different colors in it. The leaves reflect in it. The base, those bricks reflect in that shadow. Even those pink flowers, the pink snapdragons on the bottom reflect in it. So it's very important to kind of mingle different colors in that shadow and make it look beautiful, and not use just one flat gray color for the whole thing. It's going to look boring and it's not going to look correct either. This subject also a good exercise in perspective. It's not super complex, but it makes us kind of keep track of all the perspective lines, because there are so many geometric elements in here, and also the vase is pretty complex. So I switched to a round brush and I'm applying smaller shadows on the vase. You see everything is pretty soft in my painting, So this is just the first stage of working on my landscape. I'm hoping to preserve the white of the paper. I'm trying in any case to preserve it as much as possible, but I have a feeling I might have to do some corrections. The vase, it has a relief with some figures. They're pretty complex, so I probably will have to introduce some opaque white to make just small corrections, but of course it's very important to preserve the white of the paper as much as possible as well. And I'm thinking I will need some pencils as well to draw the details, because it will be very hard for me to find all those folds on the clothing, and I will need to verify the perspective as well, so I probably use some color pencils later on. If you want to try painting from this photo, I will post the finished painting and the reference photo in the community on my channel. Just click on the community tab after you watch this video and you'll be able to find all this reference material if you want to try painting this as well. Just thought it was a beautiful composition, sunny day, lots of shadows, so good exercise for those who like flowers and outdoor subjects. I'm trying to give a little more definition to the background. I do want to hint at the trees there. I just don't want them to be super prominent. So I'm darkening them a little bit, and then I'm softening and unifying them with a smaller brush with just some water to make them kind of blend with the background. I'm starting to build those tonal relationships gradually. With watercolor we have to work with layers. Usually, even if we apply paint pretty thickly, we need 2-3 layers to achieve the tonal range that will look realistic and sufficiently wide for creating the depth of space. Let's darken that shadow on the left. If you look at my little tonal reference sketch, you will see that I darkened that area to first of all make the white vase stand out more, and also to balance the painting. And I also like to use splattering because that creates that dappled shadow on the ground. I don't have to paint every single leaf. I will probably unify those splatters a little bit, but usually it works pretty well for creating dappled shadow. Trickiest part is to paint that shadow on the side of the base of the vase. It's kind of, we can barely see it, so I need to pay attention and figure out what's going on there. And you see I am connecting those two shadows, the one on the left and one that the vase casts on the steps underneath. This was my first layer. I'll let it dry. You see I have light areas in my painting and I have kind of middle tone, dark middle tone. So what I'm going to do at this stage is paint the darkest darks in the focal point. At this point I'm going to introduce a new color, Magenta Permanent by Sennelier. I mixed it with Cascade Green to create a very deep purple. Mixing Cascade Green with Opera Rose worked great for those transparent shadows, but for darkest darks I needed something more intense, and I don't use any black or gray or earth tones in my painting. So to create this very dark color I mixed two complementary colors. Magenta is kind of red and Cascade Green is complement of red to create a neutral. The greens I have all look very cool. I was using only Cascade green. I think I'm going to warm them up in just a few places with sap green. I'm finding the darkest shadows between the leaves and the flowers in the vase. And we can also work on some details. I suddenly noticed that that ivy has little purple vines kind of hanging down. That's an interesting detail. It's amazing. I never noticed those vines, of course, when I was taking the photo or when I was looking at the photo on my iPad. The longer we look at a reference, the more details we start to notice. It's like our eye can't grasp all the details all at once. So it's important to study your reference even before you start painting, not just jump in there, but working on smaller sketches like the one I did, or maybe just a pencil sketch. It all contributes to success of the final painting, because that helps us to study the reference, to see all the details, and to also figure out what exactly we want the painting to look like, because we're not copy machines, we're artists, so we interpret photos, and that interpretation, it's a process, it's not instantaneous. I feel I can darken the shadow on the left in some spots a little bit. There are some leaves there in the shadow, some branches, and they're actually darker than the shadow they cast. So I'm going to hint at those. Still working with my purples. I vary the amount of magenta and the amount of Cascade green in it, so it gives me a lot of variety. So let's add those. It's all in the foreground, so it will be okay to add them. They will not mess up our depth of space in the painting. Maybe darken that shadow closer to the base of my composition. And I need to figure out something on the right hand side to hint that those snapdragons look a mess, so I need to add some shadows to them. Maybe hint at a few stems so they will look like flowers. Those bushes behind the vase are very kind of spindly with a bunch of leaves. I believe they are azalea bushes, but they're kind of thin. You can see through them, and they create a bunch of shadows. And I definitely don't want to paint all those shadows. I just want to hint that there is something. So I am way simplifying them and unifying all those tiny little shadows just to hint at them. Because if I start to paint every single one, it's not going to look right. Okay, it's time to do something about that vase. The shadow on it needs to be darker. The brick underneath reflects under the rim of the vase, so there will be warm reflected light there. So I'm using a little bit of yellow there, and then it will cool off. The shadow will cool off as we go down. Still working with transparent color because it's a shadow, it's not something solid, so it needs to be transparent, and it's a white object, so I can't use like super dark colors, super intense colors. And the shadow has very defined edge, so I don't need to soften it. Just working wet on dry to create the cast shadow. I'm trying to remember my descriptive geometry lessons from college, which I never had to use in real life as an architect because I worked on a computer right after I graduated from college, and computer builds all those shadows for you. They spend a lot of effort teaching us how to correctly place shadows on various geometric shapes, but I never had to do it in my architectural work until I started painting. So now that knowledge came in handy, and I can attempt to show those shadows correctly. But just copying what you see works as well. I noticed with the base, it's a good idea not to make the corners very sharp because that just doesn't look right. That's brick and the corners are pretty soft, so after I softened them, they actually looked a lot more realistic. Big shadow under the rim of the vase and very deep shadows where the handles are attached, and also need some deeper color in the cutouts in the handles, because we see the background, what's behind that vase. Okay, I'll let this layer dry as well, my second layer of watercolor. I'm going to work on some details with color pencils. I have a few. I have dark green, I have a blue, indigo, and I have a slightly lighter green because I see kind of greenish lines in the light. Obviously don't want to use black or anything like that, or gray. No neutral colors. I'm sticking to the basically same color palette in my pencils as in my watercolors. These are not watercolor, these are just regular pencils, but they allow me to find all those details, those figures that are on the vase. They would be very hard to paint with watercolor, and I don't want to draw them with graphite because then it will stand out too much. So I'm using color pencil to find all those details. And I can also verify the perspective, maybe some details on the vase itself, on the base of the vase, and also on those bricks underneath the vase. And pencils basically blend with watercolor. Those pencil lines are also easy to go over with watercolor. It kind of unify everything and maybe deepen some shadows. Once you have that good guideline, it's very easy to do, just to add a few dabs of watercolor here and there, transparent of course, transparent color, to kind of soften and deepen some of the shadows and unify all those lines a little bit. And I'm also going to use white pencil. If you watched my videos, I had a tutorial where I painted some clay tile roofs in Gigonda in France, and I used white pencil to create the texture and also to lighten some areas. It goes on kind of transparently, so if you need to lighten something or create texture, white pencil works really well. So I'm going to use that to bring back a little bit lighter areas in my painting in some places. And I thought I could finish without it, but I do need just a few drops of white ink to make sure I have all my highlights in place. White pencil can't cover watercolor, so I have to use white ink just to make a couple of small corrections in my painting. And my composition is done. Here is the final painting side by side with the initial tonal sketch, and you can tell me in comments if you think I managed to create the focal point successfully and managed to successfully interpret the reference photo that had no focal point. It was all kind of the same. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you will find this information useful, and I hope you will watch some more videos on Tamirab Studios channel. I'll see you in the next one. Help other artists to see this video by liking or sharing it. To see future videos, subscribe and click the bell button to be notified when they're published. Thanks again and stay creative!